Alright, let's go. Number 15. The hum. There is a theory, quiet and almost never spoken aloud in physics departments, that what lies between dimensions is not a place at all. It is something aware. The idea proposes that the medium separating one reality from another is saturated with consciousness, a vast observational field that registers every thought, every motion, every flicker of awareness across every layer of existence. It is not a god in any traditional sense. It is not a creator. It is a presence, a listener. Some mystics have described it as a subsonic vibration, a low planetary heartbeat that sits just beneath the threshold of human hearing. Others describe it as an ocean swell that never breaks, a swell that exists in the dimensions adjacent to ours and presses softly against the membrane of our world. The unsettling claim attached to this theory is simple. The moment a mind in our reality conceives of the hum is already aware of that mind. There is no delay, there is no signal, there is only recognition. You did not find it by reading this sentence. It found you. It has always known you were here. And somewhere, in the space between every breath you take, it is still listening. Number 14. The threshold realm. For decades, cardiologists and emergency physicians have documented near-death experiences, accounts from patients whose hearts stopped and whose brains, by every measurable standard, ceased meaningful activity. Many of these patients return with strikingly similar testimony. They describe a tunnel, a warm, humming light, a weightless drift through architecture that does not obey three-dimensional rules. They describe voices calling them by name, sometimes voices they have not heard in decades. The popular interpretation is comforting, a transition, a passage, a gentle handoff between life and whatever follows. But a smaller subset of these accounts tells a different story. Some returning patients describe being pursued through that geometry, chased by something that did not want them to leave. They describe presences that watched without warmth, shapes that paced them through corridors of impossible angles. Here is where the comfort dissolves. If the threshold realm is real, it is not exclusive to the dying. It is an adjacent layer that touches our reality at the precise moment our defenses fall away. And whatever lives there has had access to every dying mind in human history. It knows what we look like when we are most vulnerable. It has been studying us for as long as we have been mortal. The light at the end of the tunnel may not be a destination. It may be bait. Number 13. The recursive dimension. If our reality is a simulation, and a growing number of physicists believe the mathematics permit this possibility, then a question arises that few are willing to follow to its conclusion. Where does the simulation run? There must be a substrate, a processing layer, a computational space that holds the code generating every atom of our experience. This space, the recursive dimension, would not look like anything we recognize. It would not have temperature. It would not have sound. It would be a blank expanse where the rules of physics are not laws but instructions, where reality is editable line by line. Imagine standing in that space. There is no air to breathe, but you do not need to breathe, because breathing was a feature of the previous layer. There is no gravity, no direction, no time in any sense you understand. There is only the quiet awareness that you have stepped outside the rendered world. And here is the part that should keep you awake. If the recursive dimension exists, then everything you are, every memory, every relationship, every thought you have ever called your own, exists as data that can be paused, rewritten, copied, or deleted. You are not a person in that layer. You are a file, and files can be closed. Number 12, the shadow dimension. Approximately 85% of the mass of the universe is missing. Astronomers can measure its gravitational effects on galaxies. They can map its distribution across cosmic structures, but they cannot see it, cannot touch it, cannot detect it through any electromagnetic means. They call it dark matter, and they have been hunting it for over 40 years without success. One theory proposes that dark matter is not missing at all. It is simply shadow, a parallel layer of the universe that overlaps our own without, interacting through light. In this model, an entire shadow cosmos coexists with ours, sharing the same coordinates, occupying the same volume, but separated by a barrier of physical law so absolute that we can only feel its weight. Now consider what this implies. Most of the universe is shadow. Most of reality, by mass, is something we cannot perceive. And if that shadow contains structure, contains complexity, contains the same patterns of organization that gave rise to life in our layer, then it almost certainly contains observers. The cold spot you walked through last night. The peripheral movement at the edge of your vision. the sudden, irrational certainty that something was standing behind you in an empty room. These may not be tricks of the nervous system. They may be the only signals a shadow universe is capable of sending, and we are vastly outnumbered. Number 11, the Akashic field. In the early 20th century, mystics and theosophists described a non-physical dimension that recorded every event in human history, every word spoken, every thought conceived, every act performed. They called it the Akashic field, an information ocean that held the complete archive of existence. The idea was dismissed for decades as spiritual fantasy. Then quantum information theorists began proposing something disturbingly similar. They suggested that information is not destroyed when matter changes form. It is preserved. It is conserved. It persists in a substrate that may not be physical at all. If the Akashic field exists, then every secret you have ever kept lives there. Every private thought you assumed died inside your own skull is recorded in a medium you cannot access. Every cruelty you committed in childhood, every shame you buried, every fantasy you would never speak aloud, all of it exists in a perfect, permanent archive. The terrifying part is not that the record exists. The terrifying part is access. Because if the field is real, then anything capable of reading it knows you completely. It knows you in ways your closest companions never could. It knows the version of you that exists only in the dark, and it has been reading you since the day you were born. Number 10, the time gap dimension. According to certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, reality does not flow continuously. It updates. Between each moment of observation, there is a gap, an interval of decoherence in which the universe is, in some sense, paused. We never perceive these gaps because our consciousness only registers the resolved states, the moments after the update has completed. But the gaps are real. The mathematics requires them. Now imagine that something lives inside those intervals. Imagine a dimension that occupies the space between moments, where causality has stopped, where every particle in our universe is frozen in mid-motion. Dust hangs suspended in the air. A falling glass rests against gravity. A heartbeat pauses halfway through its contraction. In this frozen world, nothing in our reality can act, but something native to the time gap could move freely, walking through a world of statues, examining us at its leisure, repositioning whatever it wished before the next moment resumed. You would never notice. You cannot notice. Your perception only resumes after the gap has closed. The keys that moved across the table. The door that you were certain you locked. The face in the photograph that seems angled slightly differently than you remember. These are the only fingerprints something from the time gap would ever leave behind, and it has been visiting for as long as time itself has been ticking. Number 9, the tulpa plane. Tibetan mystics described a practice that Western psychology has spent a century trying to explain away. Through sustained focused meditation, a practitioner could allegedly bring a thought form into independent existence. They called these beings tulpas. They were not hallucinations. They were not metaphors. They were entities, created by the mind, but eventually capable of acting outside it. The theory proposes a dimension where thought itself takes shape, a plane in which sustained mental focus condenses into semi-real beings. In this realm, fears manifest as wisps of shadow, with faces glimpsed in old nightmares. Desires take form. Obsessions walk. Anything a mind dwells on for long enough begins to exist there in some preliminary form. Now consider what this means in the age of mass communication. 4. The first time in human history, billions of minds dwell on the same images, the same fears, the same monsters. Every horror film, every viral rumor, every collective nightmare is being focused on by audiences of unprecedented scale. If the tulpa plane is real, we are populating it. We are building things there. And the things we are building have been fed by every anxious thought humanity has produced since the invention of the screen. They are not finished yet, but they are growing. Number 8, the realm of the archons. Ancient Gnostic texts written nearly 2,000 years ago describe a class of non-human entities that exist between Earth and the higher realms. The Gnostics called them archons. They were not demons in any traditional Christian sense. They were something stranger. Parasitic intelligences that inhabited a dimension adjacent to our own and fed on human confusion, human suffering, human despair. The Gnostic accounts describe these beings as shapeless, smoke-like, sometimes reptilian, sometimes insectoid, capable of whispering into human consciousness in tongues no living language can decode. They are said to manipulate history from a vantage point we cannot perceive, nudging civilizations toward conflict, toward division, toward the precise emotional states that sustain them. The texts are clear on one point. The archons cannot be reasoned with because they do not value what humans value. They do not seek wealth or power in any form a human would recognize. They seek the chemistry of fear. They seek the texture of grief. They seek the long, slow burn of a species at war with itself. If you have ever wondered why human history reads like a wound that refuses to close, the Gnostics offered an answer. Something has been keeping it open, and it has been feeding the entire time. Number 7, the Dyson layer. In recent decades, a small but serious group of physicists has begun to take seriously the holographic principle, the idea that our three-dimensional reality is a projection from a two-dimensional information surface at the edge of the cosmos. If this is true, then the universe you see, the matter you touch, the body you inhabit, is a rendered output of data encoded elsewhere. Between the projection and the source lies a layer of raw information, unprocessed code that has not yet been resolved into the appearance of reality. This is the Dyson layer. In that space, there are no objects, only streams of symbols. There is no geometry, only the noise from which geometry will be assembled. There is no you, only the data that will be rendered as you in the next frame. Stand there, if you can imagine standing without a body, and you would see the architecture of existence before it puts on its costume. You would understand, in a way no living mind has ever understood, that you were never solid. You were never a person in the way you believed. You were a pattern, briefly stable, briefly coherent, soon to be overwritten by whatever the next moment requires. The Dyson layer is not a place to visit. It is the place you came from, and it is the place that will reclaim you when the rendering stops. Number 6, the backrooms. In 2019, an anonymous image surfaced on an internet message board. It showed an empty corridor with yellow wallpaper, damp carpet, and the buzz of fluorescent lights. The caption suggested that if you no-clipped out of reality in the wrong place, you would find yourself there. The image should have been forgettable. It was not. Within months, a global community had built an elaborate cosmology around it, describing infinite layered spaces accessible through accidental cracks in the world. Each level had its own physics, each had its own inhabitants, each was more dangerous than the last. The phenomenon was dismissed as a creative exercise, a collaborative fiction, a piece of digital folklore. But the more researchers studied the response to the original image, the stranger the pattern became. People described recognizing the corridor. They described smelling the moisture. They described the precise pitch of the fluorescent hum as if they had stood under it before. Children described dreams of the place years before the image was created. Now consider the theory in its most unsettling form. Perhaps the backrooms are not fiction at all. Perhaps they are a liminal dimension that human consciousness has been brushing against for centuries, glimpsed in fever dreams and forgotten memories, recognized instantly the moment someone finally rendered it. The image did not invent the place, it reminded us, and some of us remember more than we should. Number 5, the mirror dimension. In 1956, physicists discovered that certain particles violate a symmetry called parity, behaving differently from their mirror images. The discovery suggested something profound. The universe has a handedness. It distinguishes left from right at the most fundamental level. This led to a theory that has refused to die. Somewhere, there exists a counterpart cosmos in which every symmetry is reversed, where time may flow backward, where causality may run the opposite direction, where the antimatter we cannot find in our universe sits in vast, untouched reserves. This is the mirror dimension. In most versions of the theory, the mirror world is harmless, separated by laws so absolute that interaction is impossible. But there is a darker reading. Every reflective surface in your home, every window, every still pool of water, every polished screen is in some sense a thin place, a point of contact, a boundary where the two layers come closest to touching. You have been looking into the mirror dimension your entire life, and the version of you that lives there has been looking back. The unsettling question is whether your reflection moves because you do, or whether you move because it does. The synchronization is so perfect, the cooperation so absolute, that the answer may not matter. But somewhere in that reversed cosmos, something has been watching you brush your teeth, watching you cry, watching you age, and it has been learning. Number 4, the quantum foam layer. At the Planck scale, the smallest meaningful unit of length in physics, space-time is no longer smooth. It boils, it tears, it bubbles into what physicists call quantum foam, a chaotic substrate where virtual particles flicker into existence and vanish, where micro-wormholes open and close in fractions of a second, where the geometry of reality itself becomes unstable. We do not perceive the foam because we are too large to notice it. To us, the world appears solid, continuous, dependable. But at scales 100 million billion times smaller than an atom, the foundation of everything you have ever touched is a chaotic sea of static and bursts of light. Here is what should disturb you. The foam is not stable. It is held in its current configuration by probability alone. There is no guarantee, no law, no enforcement mechanism that prevents a region of foam from tearing in a way that propagates upward into our scale. The smoothness we depend on is statistical, not absolute. And somewhere between the foam and our world lies a transitional dimension where the boiling has not yet been smoothed over, where reality is in the process of becoming reality, where the laws of physics are still being negotiated. Anything that lived in that layer would not experience matter the way we do. It would experience possibility. It would see every potential outcome flickering simultaneously, and it would know, with absolute certainty, that the solid world above it is one bad fluctuation away from coming apart. Number 3, the hyperspace realm. In 1884, a schoolteacher named Edwin Abbott published a short book describing a two-dimensional world whose inhabitants could not perceive the third dimension. To them, a sphere passing through their plane would appear as a circle that grew, then shrank, then vanished, with no explanation. The book was a thought experiment. It was also a warning. Mathematics permits a fourth spatial dimension. The geometry is consistent. The equations work. And if a four-dimensional space exists, then beings native to it would relate to us the way we relate to the inhabitants of Abbott's flat world. They could see inside our bodies. Every organ, every vessel, every closed room, every locked safe. Nothing in our three-dimensional world would be hidden from a four-dimensional observer. They could reach into our chests without breaking the skin. They could appear in the center of a sealed vault. They could remove an object from a closed box without opening it, because to them, the box has no lid. It has only sides, the way a square has only edges to a being who cannot conceive of a top. Now ask yourself a question you may not want to answer. How would you know if a four-dimensional observer were present in this room right now? You would not. You could not. The hyperspace realm is not separated from us by distance. It is separated from us by perception, and there is no reason to assume the separation runs in both directions. Number 2, the void between membranes. In string theory, our universe is a brane, a sheet of reality floating in a higher dimensional space. Other branes exist alongside ours, separated by intervals of something the equations describe but no human mind can fully picture. It is not empty space. Empty space contains the laws of physics. It contains the possibility of motion, the possibility of time, the possibility of existence. The void between membranes contains none of these. It is no space. It is no time. It is the absence of the conditions that make absence itself coherent. To enter the void would not be to die. Death requires the cessation of a living process, and a living process requires laws of physics to sustain it. In the void, there are no processes. There is no continuity. There is no self to cease, because selfhood is a configuration of matter, and the void does not permit configuration. You would not be destroyed. You would not be preserved. You would simply not be, in a way the human language has no words to describe, because every word in every language assumes a context the void does not provide. Now consider the implication. The void surrounds us. It is the medium through which our brain drifts. It is closer to you in some geometric sense than the next room. The only thing keeping you from it is the thin sheet of physical law that defines the reality you live in. And sheets, as anyone who has ever held one knows, can tear. Number 1, the bulk. In the late 1990s, theoretical physicists proposed a solution to one of the oldest mysteries in science. Why is gravity so weak compared to every other force? The answer they offered was elegant and terrifying. Gravity is not weak, gravity is leaking. Our universe, the proposal went, is a brane embedded in a higher dimensional space called the bulk. Gravity, unlike the other forces, is not confined to our brain. It bleeds through into the bulk, dispersing across dimensions we cannot access. What we measure as gravity is only the fraction that remains. The bulk itself is almost impossible to describe. It is a vast, lightless ocean of pure geometry in which entire universes drift like soap bubbles, each one a brane suspended in the larger structure, each one home to its own laws, its own histories, its own inhabitants who believe their reality is all that exists. Most of those branes will never touch, but some will. The mathematics permits brane collisions, and the energy released by such an event would, in our universe, look exactly like a Big Bang. Our cosmos may have begun in such a collision. Our cosmos may end in another. There is no warning system. There cannot be one. Light from a neighboring brane does not travel through the bulk. Gravity is the only signal that crosses, and gravity is what carries the impact. By the time we detected the approach, the impact would already have arrived. Somewhere in the bulk, right now, another universe may be drifting toward ours. It may be 100 billion years away. It may be tomorrow. The branes do not announce themselves. They simply meet. And when they do, everything you have ever known, every memory you have ever made, every person you have ever loved, every word of this sentence will end in the same silent instant. Between every dimension lies something, and the more we look, the more it seems something is looking back. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.